You're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast post-game. Thanks a ton with John Schuster. I'm merely Mike Luke. All right, we got the comments coming in hot and heavy. First and foremost, though, awesome. We're going to talk some Arizona football, obviously. Back the A in full effect. It was a star-studded group of people at this Arizona basketball game. Kevin Durant, LeBron James' son. You might have seen him on the court. And Jacob Manu, Noah Fifita, Tetaroa McMillan, a lot of different things. Arizona is a football school after all, but we've got to get through basketball first. Schuster, this was kind of the typical Arizona game for me in that SC was overmatched. Arizona gets out big early. SC comes back because Arizona just kind of lets them back in. Then when Arizona plays at their top level, they're really about as good a team as there is in the country.
For all of their potential fanfare, and of course the other celebrity sighting, which I'm almost certain would be Mike Luke. There would, it was kind of it was sort of a pedestrian, uninspiring basketball game generally, right, wasn't it? And it's one of those things that's sort of difficult to criticize per se, because Arizona did what it was supposed to, more or less. It won by 15 points. It was in control the whole way, had a number of assists that led to buckets as opposed to one-on-one play, held USC to something like 40% shooting. But, I don't think it dissuades any of us from what the concern is in regards to how Arizona performs in two different venues. Arizona at McHale is usually, frankly, better than this, but was clearly good enough to never be really threatened in this matchup tonight. But there's nothing, again, about this game, and who knows what's going to happen, even if they roll UCLA by, a Colorado-style margin. I think the skepticism is going to be, how well does Arizona play away from home? And I think that, Mike, is something that's probably going to linger with them for a while and might be a concern even into the tournament.
Yeah, this is also a team, though, that, you look around college basketball, I've come to this conclusion as well, and I think a lot of people live in kind of a fishbowl where it's, this only happens to us. There is not a quote-unquote great team in college basketball this year. You look at it, Kansas lost to Central Florida. UConn lost to Seton Hall. I can keep going on with some other examples. This isn't exactly a squad or a team that, Arizona, it's not really unique, I guess, to college basketball amongst the really good teams. I thought Jay Billis hit the nail on the head where he said, I think Arizona is clearly in that top tier, but there isn't a team that you watch and you're like, all right, they are head and shoulders above everybody else. I
think, Mike, the weird thing about the top tier aspect of that is that you look at a lot of these teams that are really good but vulnerable, and you can see maybe another interesting NCAA tournament as a result. What Arizona has done, and I think a lot of the other teams that fall into the category that you rightfully mentioned, that there is going to be some core of those teams with a higher level of talent that's going to make a deep tournament run, but it looks like a lot of those teams are potentially susceptible to getting bounced early as well. So it is one of those things where, you're in this position where Arizona appears to have the talent where if they can put some things together, they can be extraordinarily daunting. We've talked about this now on 16 post-game shows. But I think I think the dog days of college basketball is something that gets overlooked as well. My guess is, Mike, that if you go back to pretty much every previous NCAA season, there's a bunch of upsets around the second and third week in January.
Right.
You're away from the holidays. You're away from the hype of the, non-conference, maybe tournament games. You're in the grind of, you're back to school. You're into the grind of 2 a weekend conference. And the tournament's still way the hell down the road.
Right.
So,
you're kind of going, like a lot of really good teams, you're just kind of going through the motions to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think so. And it's probably, this is nothing new. Now, I understand that it's frustrating because Arizona doesn't look as good as they should. I think we all agree with that. We all understand that. But your point is spot on, and I think it has a lot to do with, a variety of things. And between the two of us, I think we've touched on a lot of them. I think the dog day thing is important. Mid to late January is just a difficult time to continue to win in college basketball, and you see a lot of upsets around this time of year. And and that nobody is separating as a result, you can see this being maybe not a wide open field because one of the teams you mentioned is probably going to be standing close to the end, if not at the end. But you can still see a lot of favorable seeds up against it a little bit in the first weekend. And frankly, the way Arizona's playing right now or looks right now, they are one of those core. And maybe a lot of those other teams, Mike, as you noted, fall into that category as well.
Okay, now one thing that is a little unique, we saw Jaden Bradley started the second half. I like this. I like Bradley. I think that when Jaden Bradley comes in, I think that things change defensively. He's active. I don't think he's nearly as bad offensively as some people make him out to be. I also think this is a little bit of starting to hold Kylan Boswell accountable. And again, Boswell is a very good player, but there's also something to the degree where it's like, all right, we need more out of you. I liked starting Jaden Bradley in that second half. I'm a big fan of starting Jaden Bradley in that second half.
A big fan, Mike Luke says. I have nothing against him. We've talked about this on this show before. One of the reasons that you have depth is so that you can go to your bench. And one of the great motivators potentially is putting someone on the bench as a result of not performing particularly well. And maybe that's the type of motivation that Boswell needs. There may be a lot of communication going on behind the scenes, but it's pretty clear at this stage that Boswell isn't playing as well as we know he's capable of playing. The reasons for that are probably a little bit more difficult to dissect, but if at some point, to hold somebody accountable, this is the best way to do it. You bench him. And if Bradley is playing better, it might give Arizona the kind of spark that they like. Usually guys like this, Mike, one of the things you like coming off the bench is someone with some sort of identity that isn't particularly generic, does something specifically well that kind of sparks the team when he's in the game. And maybe Bradley defensively on the perimeter is somebody who can do that, because the easiest way at this stage for Arizona to be more active is to be more aggressive, I think, defensively on the perimeter and utilize their athleticism and length to try to get into transition on the open floor. And Bradley may be better suited for that right now.
I think there's a big question, though, that we haven't really discussed. How many of these players do you think went to Circle K at some point during this week? Because I think maybe the lethargic performance has to do with Circle K not maybe being in the equation. What say you, John Schuster?
I think that's a very real possibility, and I've heard through many of my inner circle sources that perhaps the Wildcat basketball team has not been there as consistently as they should.
And the problem, here's the thing that is unacceptable about these kids not going to Circle K. There's literally one right down the street on 6th Street. Check it out. Join Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit CircleK.com for details. And one thing that it did feel like, it felt like there were some OGs that was maybe in the mix, John Schuster.
Well, I mean, you're the one who understands the OG in the mix, and I can tell you how, because you have the read in front of you that you are about to provide at this very second.
All right, to learn more about OG's gummies and where you can find them, head on over to ogsbrands.com. Shoo, that shirt is fantastic as always. We do appreciate that. Again, everybody, we're going to get into Arizona football here in just a second. By the way, Jedd Fisch is not in the inner circle. We agree with this. He is not in the inner circle. Here's where I'm at, though, with the Pac-12. Right now, Oregon's the team to beat. They're undefeated, and Arizona fans need to be rooting against Oregon. They play Colorado. They're starting to get healthy. Where Arizona's at a little bit of a disadvantage right now is that you drop 2 games against 2 kind of bum teams. I think the Stanford game you're okay with because, listen, anytime that the team shoots 19 of 12 from 3-point range, you're not going to beat a team shooting 164% from 3. Totally get it. But the Washington State game was the one to me where it looked like you were just kind of going through the motions. That to me is the one that can't happen. We don't like that. And not only do we not like that, it gave away a game that I don't think that we should have lost, John Schuster.
Do you think Oregon's better than Arizona? Or do you think Oregon's just perhaps in a more advantageous position to win the conference regular season?
I don't know. I think Arizona's better. I am still going to pick Arizona. I am backing the A come March. I think Arizona's going to win it all. But Oregon's about to get really tough because they just got their best player back in N'Faly Dante, their big man. They're going to probably get Biddle back in a couple weeks. Oregon's going to be a problem. And the fact they've been able to win all these games without him, I think, is obviously something that's good. I still think that Arizona, and this game showed this to me again, I still believe that Arizona's upside, I believe, is better than any team in the country. I think when Arizona is clicking and Arizona is really rocking and rolling, I think their upside is the best team in the country.
Okay. And again, those are two very different things. You want Arizona to win the regular season element of the conference, of course, the PAC-X, of course, and you'd like to see them win the conference tournament. But obviously, the main goal is to see how well you can do and whether you're prepared enough to make the deep tournament run. The Wildcat program and Wildcat fans ultimately deserve. So I was just curious because they are two different things. You don't have to necessarily be the best team in a conference to win the conference, and especially when you have some of the staggered schedules and other things going on, injuries and so forth throughout the course of the year. Variety of different things that can go into that. But, maybe it clearly doesn't look like a conference that's going to get a lot of teams in the tournament, but I guess in its final year, hopefully Arizona and to some extent Oregon represents the last dying gasps of the remnant of the West Coast Power Five, the Conference of Champions, or Chumpions, as the case may be, as it goes fleeting away.
We are a football school. We'll get back to some basketball here in a few minutes because we still got some reads. But David Blattman, the great David Blattman. I don't think I've ever spent so much time during an Arizona basketball game in mid-January thinking about Arizona football. What a world. All right. First of all, I have no problem with Jedd Fisch leaving to Washington. You're getting paid $55 million. It is what it is. I get that. I do have a problem with how he left. I did not like the video that they put out where right after he said that he was heartbroken that he had to leave this team, he's smiling in Tucson with the Washington AD. I thought that was kind of unnecessary, to be honest with you. And I'm not a big fan of if you're preaching family, you're preaching all of this, and then and yes, Jacob Franklin, that is it. But if you're preaching family, loyalty, love, and you show up for essentially 3 minutes, and by all accounts, I had a lot of people in the meeting tell me this, that Jedd Fisch showed up and said, guys, I'm going to Washington, wish you nothing but the best. I got a plane to catch. See ya. I think you owe those guys a little bit more, especially when you had players on this roster who turned down millions of dollars. We're going to get to the good stuff, Cosmic Contrarian. Don't worry about it. But I didn't like how he left. That being said, I'm going to say this. All that happening, if Noah Fifita, if T-Mac, if all of them come back, you could be looking at a 30 for 30 type thing. And not only that, I think Noah Fifita, being that he would be here 3 more years, having the opportunity to leave when he did, I think you start looking at somebody that's going to be one of the most beloved figures in Arizona football history, John Schuster.
Yeah, very well could be. And hopefully that's the scenario that plays out. I'm going to take a slightly different tack because I know this has been very understandably emotional for a frustrated fan base because it happened so quickly and it just it felt like there was a lot of jilting going on. But Jedd Fisch, once we pull away from this a little bit, deserves to be thanked because he did what a coach is supposed to do. He left the program better than he found it. And if Brennan had come into this coaching position in the last cycle before Jedd Fisch, he is starting from the same bedrock location that Fisch does, and we don't know if we're in this position right now. But that's one of the so Fisch, to his credit, and I understand this is the level why it's frustrating because Arizona's going to be in a what if situation if they end up 6-6 next year or 8-4 next year or don't exceed what a lot of people think they could. But Fisch has created a very unique situation, very unusual situation for Arizona football. that hasn't happened since 1986. Consider that for a moment. 1986, and even
your 50th birth year.
Some have told me, have suggested that you should add some centuries to that. But, nevertheless, Arizona, prior to Jedd Fisch, was a job that coaches went to if they wanted the end of their collegiate career. Nobody got a better job after they were a head coach at the University of Arizona. This was a mortuary job. Jedd Fisch has turned it at least into a stepping stone job. To get to a stepping stone job, that means that you have to have left the program in better shape than you found it. And he deserves, I think, all kinds of credit for that, despite the frustration of the way that the exit ultimately occurred.
I agree with that, but I will say I think it's a little bit different in the portal era. He tried his hardest to gut this roster. He wanted all of these players to follow him, and I think what's interesting about this is that they didn't follow him.
Well,
you look at when players. When coaches leave, when players leave, generally they take a lot of guys with them. Look at Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley went to SC. He took the #1 draft pick with him, Caleb Williams. Mario Williams, a wide receiver, took absolutely no time following him. I think that when he left here, I think that he thought that he was going to get all of these players to follow him. And so far, that has not happened. And to me, listen. I think a big part of this is spite by some of these players. And I actually say that in a good way. I talked with a parent who said something to the extent where, and I thought this was an interesting point. He said, listen, I don't want to get into all of this, but he said, my family has done a real service to him. We've done a lot of work for him, keeping this roster together over the years, bringing in players. All I wanted was a phone call. I wouldn't have talked him out of it. I would have just thought that with as much time and effort as we put in, and as much time as he asked us to put in, I just felt that I just needed, and he said, I didn't care if it was a 5-second phone call and if it was 5 seconds before he announced. I felt that we deserve not to be blindsided by this at the very last second. And that to me is something that sticks with me, John Schuster.
Well, okay. And that's completely understandable. And I hear where you're coming from, and I don't disagree with, no, I don't disagree. However, not everybody bailed on him. And, he's got half of his coaching staff still went up with him for Washington. So it would suggest to me that half of his coaching staff doesn't.
Well, they're getting a lot more money. They're getting a lot more money. I'm talking about the players.
Well, nevertheless, and certainly the players could get a lot more money if they decided to leave too, and they still might, But if a lot of them stay, that's awesome for Arizona, at least in the short term. And it's up to Brennan to be able to continue to recruit to try to put them in a good position. So if Fisch's sales pitch, and I'm not sure if it was a sales pitch, it may have been Washington. Was on option 1 that didn't work, option 2 that didn't work, and was afraid that their roster was going to be completely gutted and needed to make the same hire. I heard, you and Shear were talking about this, have been talking about this for the last 3 or 4 days or whatever, and how fast this process works. Hey, maybe Brennan's about to do an exceptional job, keep a bunch of people here, lay down, a foundation that players ultimately like. And, the Cats are very good next year. But, maybe we'll find out down the road that perhaps, Jedd Fisch ultimately made some sort of a career mistake. But again, all of this still gets us to the same place. And the same place is Arizona is better now than it was before he got here. And the guy, and the reason he left is because he took a gig for $54 million.
Right.
So,
no, I don't begrudge.
That's even with he could have done this better. True. He could have done that better. True. He could have done 3 better and 4 better. And he could have been a lot more, he could have been a lot more Kalen DeBoer about his departure than he ultimately was Jedd Fisch. All of that's true. But in the end, it's still the same bottom line. And better players have an opportunity to stay here. And so Arizona football also has an opportunity to be pretty good as a result.
Here's all the other part that I don't like, and then we're going to get back to Dwayne Aquino. We're going to get back because I thought that was an interesting point. The other thing I didn't like is the agent reaching out to pretty much everybody in the Tucson media and trying to push a narrative that wasn't true, where he said, well, they didn't even really talk about a contract until since September. Well, I got a problem with that when you're pushing that, because I have Jedd Fisch on Jim Rome saying we're working on it and we're almost there. So I also don't like the misdirection behind the scenes where you have an agent essentially calling people in the Tucson media and then saying something that just wasn't true. To me, that was all unnecessary. I get what you're saying about leaving a better roster. I get all that. But there's also something to be said when you're trying to the misdirection, the sleight of hand after leaving. Just own it. All you have to do is just say this. I left for a job that's paying me $55 million. Cool. Don't have your agent start calling people in the Tucson media, making up stuff about how Arizona wasn't even talking to you about a contract extension, where you're literally right on Jim Rome last week talking about that. That to me is where you totally lose me in the grand scheme of things. Take the money, leave, totally cool. Don't try to come back then and undermine Arizona when, let's be honest, Arizona was the only school that was taking a chance on Jedd Fisch. No other schools were ever interviewing Jedd Fisch for a head coaching opportunity. This wasn't like he was turning down Michigan to come to Arizona. This was Arizona put their neck out on the line for him. And again, Jedd Fisch performed. Take the money. You don't have to try to undermine them on your way out. That's my problem.
Okay. Fine. Even with all those problems, again, we get to the same place. But at the same place, there was something that Scheer said, that when, and there are a lot of really interesting conversations that you and Scheer have had over the course of the last few days.
I make better points than Scheer.
Well, I think, except that you're at least one dog in the background less than Scheer, which I think you really have to work out. I really want to get a broadcast with Scheer and Brad Alice at the same time to count how many dogs are in the screen. And I want to know what the gambling side over under is ultimately on that one. But that as an aside, I think you're still in this situation where I completely forgot the point that I was trying to make. So because I'm old and have many centuries, I'm going to remember that point in about 90 seconds. So go ahead and talk about something else.
P-Posh,
I'll remember the point and then we'll go from there.
The great P-Posh. Robbins and Heeke were absolutely crucified for hiring Fisch, and he grabbed the first bag of cash Washington waved at him. I don't blame him for grabbing the first bag of cash. I blame him for trying to undermine them on the way out.
Okay, that was helpful. Thank you for bringing that up. That was the point I was trying to get to. Scheer made some comment about how Arizona just wasn't going to pay Washington money. Why not?
Because they don't
if you're in an arms race. And how many times did I hear you say, and Anthony say, and Scheer say that the $240 million was meaningless? A bunch. Because you're going to tell me right now the $240 million was meaningless.
I am.
Okay. If the $240 million was meaningless and your contract offer was good, $5 million, whatever it was, and you're trying to, bring up the others as well. If you're in an arms race and you think that the coach is good and you want to keep the coach, and maybe you got to pay. And they didn't match the offer.
But you also don't have, and again, you don't have Big Ten money. You don't have that Big Ten contract money, which is a drastically different $70 million annually.
Exactly. And you just walked into something. So what you are seeing, and we've seen this at Arizona now, is a much bigger problem. We've seen a baseball coach leave to the SEC, which has deeper pockets. Why? Because he got more money. We've now seen a football coach from Arizona leave to a future Big Ten school. Why? Because they have more money. Other reasons are in that as well, but in the end, they have more money that Arizona is not able to match. So if Arizona can't match a coach's salary and can't match you from NIL, at what point do we see a separation in programs between the haves and the have-nots, and Arizona is on the wrong end of that? That, to me, is, from a longer-term standpoint here, a much bigger concern.
Well, the other problem that I also think is the ABOR is Arizona in the state of Arizona, you can only offer 5-year contracts. You can't offer 7-year contracts. Arizona is not able to offer more than 5 years. Jedd Fisch got a 7-year, $55 million deal. Those extra 2 years at $3 million more per year, that's a big deal. So yes, Arizona does not have that money. Now, I think a big part of this is too, is making sure that you are at least have because there's going to be another massive blow up in college athletics here in the next 5 or 6 years. And that's why, to me, it was important to get to the Big 12, because you at least want to have a seat at the table. I think we're eventually going towards basically a 2 entity.
Yeah, there's going to be a 2-tier situation with
it's going to be the big, it's essentially, for lack of a better term, it's going to be the Big 10. It's going to be the SEC. And that's going to be it. What the most important?
I think it's going to be the Big 10 and the SEC.
Okay,
and they're going to anyway. Go ahead.
But the most important thing is to be able to have a seat at the table, to be in a conference, and that, to me, a conference that is actually sustainable in a certain way, like the Big 12 is, like the ACC is. Obviously, these are not the Big 10 or the SEC. Totally get all of that. But you needed to be in something where you didn't want to be Oregon State. You didn't want to be Washington State, where you're left totally on the outside and you're basically going to be in no man's land. That being said, $31 million is not $70 million. So again, Arizona did not have that money. And again, like, I almost feel like we're talking past each other a bit. I don't have a problem with him taking the money. I just have a problem with him doing it in the manner he did, but more so than anything, undermining Arizona on the way out, when Arizona was the school that gave you a chance. Take the job, got more money, head out. Kalen DeBoer did it right. Guys, I never thought I was going to really leave. I left. I just think that when you start going down the Weasley, oh, well, they did this, they didn't do this for me. That, to me, is also kind of snake oil, and it looks at a guy resume where a guy's been there for essentially 2 years at every single job. That, to me, is the issue.
Which we knew that was a concern coming in, but the concern I think we had coming in about Fisch's longevity was whether he was actually going to win at Arizona. And at the time, consider, before this last week, how many times? Dozens? Hundreds? Everyone in the media and people, fans up and down the run. Fisch said the right thing. Fisch said the right thing. He dropped Tomey. He brought in Gronkowski. He connected Brewski. He figured out a way to navigate the alumni.
That, to me, is even the worst part about this, is that he wasn't a neophyte with this. He knew what he was doing. It was all calculated, and he knew what he was doing on the way out as well. That's what bothers me more. I wish it was a Rich Rod where you didn't even know what was going on social media.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't wish it was Rich Rod, because Brennan has better talent in this roster right now. So even if Fisch tried to blindside you, if most of the players stay, then it failed. And he went to another job with an opportunity to win there. And you're going to hear a lot about Don James. You're going to hear a lot about Entman. And you're going to hear a lot about, bringing back Warren Moon. You're going to hear, it's going to be the exact, just change the names from whatever the blueprint was that Fisch had in Tucson. He's going to use in Seattle as well. And it might work. Whatever it was that Fisch did between the lines worked. And his reclamation project at this school is absolutely remarkable. And again, I get that the last week sucked. I get it. And I'm really not I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I feel like there's more here. And there are more elements and a lot of different peripherals that I think will be interesting as the months progress and we can separate ourselves. And you talked about a couple issues that I thought were fairly interesting, kind of in passing, and one of them is the Board of Regents. I don't know, has anybody the Board of Regents, to me, is one of these great examples of bureaucracy, in that they've been around for as long as any of us remember, so we kind of take them for granted, and as a result, nobody really asks, what the hell do they do and why do we have them? And this may be an example in the modern era of, and remember, I'm just quoting what Scheer said on your show 2 or 3 days ago. Things happen fast. You got to hire a coach. It was you and or Scheer who said Arizona's got to hire a coach by Wednesday, which they did, which means quick. You got the belief is that because of the portal, you've got to make moves fast, a lot faster than you could the last time around. So something like the Board of Regents might be a bureaucratic slog that works against modern athletics in a new transfer portal, big money TV contract era.
The ABOR, I always imagine being like 12 Michael Crows that are there, and they look at sports and they're like, not cool, not cool. All right, now we're going to talk about the roster and Brent Brennan, because I thought he had made a lot of really good points here. And again, this is when you know, I guess, that you can actually never mind. All right, now you might say to yourself before the season, Mike Luke, how many wins did you pick for Arizona? I picked 10. Actually, I didn't. I picked 7. John Schuster, how many did you pick? John Schuster picked 0. Actually, he didn't pick 0. But the BetMGM Sportsbook app,
Luke ever asked.
the BetMGM Sportsbook app is where it is at. Check it out. Sign up for BetMGM. Use bonus code PHNX. Place your first BetMGM Sportsbook wager through the BetMGM Sportsbook mobile app for at least $5. You will receive 158, not 157, 158 instantly in additional winnings, regardless of your wager's outcome. Check out the show notes for details. Now let's hear Shane Diefenbach with the disclaimer.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 New York. Call 1-800-327-5050 Massachusetts. 21 plus to wager. Please gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP Arizona. 1-800-BETS-OFF Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 Puerto Rico in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Visit BetMGM.com for terms. This promotional offer is not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico.
All right. I want to give my guy Dave Heeke a lot of credit too. Dave gets beat up all the time. I don't like it. I want to say this. When Dave Heeke took, and I think this is very important for people to remember, because Dave gets beat up a lot. When Dave Heeke took over, these programs were in total disarray. You had football players beating up, choking out their girlfriends, getting 5 to 20-year sentences. You had track coaches threatening to kill their, you had a basketball program with a basketball player that was already in huge trouble. You also, again, I can keep going. It was a litany. Every single week, it felt like something else was happening. When Dave Heeke got here, that got cleaned up. And I think that is a big thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily give the man credit for. This was a mess that Dave Heeke inherited from an off the field perspective. Forget on the field. This was an off the field mess. You have not had those issues since he has been here. And again, I think that's a big part of it. Again, it's not necessary. It's not the whole thing, obviously, but I also enjoy looking now and not realizing that every time I open the newspaper or whatever entity you did, you're like, oh, who's the latest player that's choking out a co-ed? I mean, that to me means something because it got embarrassing, and Heeke cleaned that up, and I think you've got to give him a lot of credit for that, John Schuster.
But isn't it also remarkable that even though it feels like Greg Byrne did everything he could to Chernobyl the program, years after he's still not athletic director, he managed to Chernobyl the football program. Right. Like, absolutely. He's not even involved. He's not even around. And yet that Alabama hire sent a seismic ripple throughout the entirety of college basketball, and Arizona got swarmed under it. And it's all of the things you mentioned were in the midst of the Byrne regime. And here's one that indirectly, requires Heeke to try to make a hire on the fly. And I guess to Brennan's credit, if it's true that Brennan was part of the interviewing process before, that Brennan was still and didn't get it, that Brennan didn't feel jilted and was still willing to have that conversation to come here. So he's got to think there's something here, apparently. And, maybe that's good news.
And Jose, this listen, he takes a huge L. He takes a huge L for Kevin Sumlin. There's no excusing it. There's, listen, it is what it is. Jedd Fisch, I don't like Jedd Fisch personally for what he did, but we're just coming off one of the best seasons in U of A football history. And if all these players come back, this is going to be an absolutely loaded roster. So any way you put it, even though I think he was slimy, Jedd Fisch was an awesome hire because of what he was able to do. The Brent Brennan, you got Brent Brennan within 48 hours. I thought in this day and age, this isn't like it was back in the 30s or whatever, where you could wait 3 months and who cares. You've got to make a hire now because you could hemorrhage that roster. He obviously knew who he wanted. He made that play. He made it happen. Then I think he handled the Sean Miller situation perfectly. Listen, Miller's Road it was at its end here. I don't think that I'm really breaking any news. You didn't have a tournament win in 5 years, and everybody was just kind of beaten down. He's not the easiest guy in the world to be around behind the scenes, all of that. Then you hired Tommy Lloyd. Now, Lloyd has not been perfect. His NCAA tournament has not been good, but you can tell on the court, he's brought a top 10 product. And not only that, he's done it in a friendly way. He hasn't been combative, and I think he's provided a breath of fresh air. So overall, though, again, the someone hire, total F. But other than that, and cleaning up, I got to give Dave Heeke a lot of credit, John.
And I think, and I think based on the things that you laid out there, I agree with that. That said, there's a caveat here. If you believe college athletics has changed or is about to change, you have now lost a baseball coach that you wanted to keep who won a national title somewhere else. And you lost a football coach who won you 10 games that is going to a program that was in the national title game just a couple weeks ago. So the changes you have to make now are when these situations come up, you've got to figure out inventive ways to be able to match them financially or provide something else out there that makes Arizona a desirable location to keep this athletic department in a good situation that allows it to be competitive on a national level, when I fear that the SEC and the Big Ten from an overall money standpoint are going to continue to separate. And one of the things, Mike, about that you mentioned is that you talked about how it's better to be in the Big 12 and it's better to be in the ACC and all the rest of it. And those things are true. Clearly, you don't want to be Oregon State and Washington State. But right now, Florida State wants nothing to do with the ACC.
No doubt.
Why? Because they think the ACC cannot favorably compete because of the broadcast deals in the Big Ten and the SEC. So if they feel that way about their conference, which is on par with the Big 12, then, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of separation we're staring at here and how it is. And this is Heeke's responsibility as long as we're here. How well he can navigate that when you're throwing the amount of money that is at historic levels that we haven't seen in college athletics before for a variety of legislative reasons.
All right, now let me ask you this. Do you think that Dave Heeke has ever had some burros?
That may be one of the most incredible questions of the show. And,
have you had some burros?
You're an inside source on this one. So I'll leave that answer to you. No.
All right. Yeah. Jacob Franklin has, though.
Oh,
all right. Check out some burros. Let them cater your next meal, big or small. Order online or find one near you by visiting someburros.com. All right. Now, one thing. All right. Now, Keona Wilhite definitely in play. We will find that one out. Irish Mike, great question. I apologize for ignoring that. Now, Dwayne Aquina certainly seems like he's going to be back on the staff in some capacity. Brent Brennan mentioned that. What we're also finding out too, and take it for what it's worth, is that a lot of these assistants didn't really get along with Jedd Fisch, or at least some of these guys. Johnny Nansen booked it, didn't get along with him. Dwayne Aquina didn't get along with him either. Dwayne Aquina is coming back. I think Dwayne Aquina is I feel very comfortable with Dwayne Aquina on staff. I don't want him ever running my offense. I've seen that game, and it was one of the worst. It made these Iowa teams look like the greatest show on turf.
No, it didn't. It wasn't quite that bad. Iowa was really bad. Now, granted, Arizona's offense was bad.
By the way, I'm turning the A on. Go ahead, John Schuster. Talk.
Oh, you're turning the A on. Well, I think again, a lot of the things that work in these situations, and this is one of the things that I'll admit kind of makes me a little bit uncomfortable here, because prior to last week, nobody ever said publicly in any forum anything negative about Jedd Fisch. Nothing. He was building the program again. He was saying the right things. He was cultivating alumni. He had the crowd behind him. He had the university behind him. He had students behind him. They loved this guy. And in conversations and platforms like this, it was almost never that anybody said anything negative about Fisch. And now that he's gone, all of a sudden, well, that was bad, and that was bad, and that was bad, and that was bad. You know what? Tell me that was bad when he was here.
The thing about it, though, is you have more knowledge at this point, though. Listen, I'm not putting him down for Dwayne Aquina and Johnny Nansen not getting along with him. But what I'm going to say is that as soon as the season was over, Dwayne Aquina was off to Texas. Now that Brent Brennan is back here at Tucson, guess who's back in Tucson? Dwayne Aquina. Again, I'm not bashing Jedd Fisch. Some people just don't get along with each other. But you also, I think, what you also know, though, too, is when you have more information. I know for a fact when I'm receiving a phone call or somebody else is receiving a phone call from Jedd Fisch's agent talking about a bunch of stuff that isn't true, looking to undermine Arizona, that's information that I didn't have before. So I think that also has to come in. All right, go ahead. What do you got?
No. I'm gonna believe what you're saying. I find it hard to believe to a large degree that the massive piling on of negativity wasn't known prior to that. But nevertheless, that's perhaps neither here nor there. As far as bringing someone like Aquina back to the program, I hope that he does well. And I hope that Brennan is able to, frankly, use a lot of the Fisch blueprint to be successful here. Because that blueprint was, that blueprint worked. And hopefully Brennan can tap into that and be successful and get and utilize the recruiting necessary and, whatever imaginative NIL is out there to be successful and give Arizona opportunities. Listen,
I'll give Jedd Fisch a lot of credit on a lot of different things. First of all, he clearly understood a template on how to win at Arizona. And that is something that has basically befuddled almost every single coach since maybe even Larry Smith. In that he knew the importance of, if I'm going to miss on a player, I'm going to miss big. This was the first year in forever where it felt like Arizona was able to hold their own against every single talented team they played on both sides of the line. It wasn't a Rich Rod thing where you felt like you were just kind of out scheming people, but this thing was going to come. And it felt like there was a depth aspect to this team. Again, not great depth, but it was only here 3 years. There was a talent level on this team that we haven't seen in more than 20 years. That is all on Jedd Fisch and their ability to be able to develop that talent. A lot of these guys that we're talking about were 3-star kids. These weren't they weren't all like McMillan's where they were 5-star players. What he did as far as being able to be able to recruit, to be able to develop, and to be able to have an overarching vision of, I'm not going to be able to get the big offensive linemen from SEC country. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the big Polynesians. That is something that we hadn't seen here since Dick Tomey. He deserves all the credit in the world for that because, again, that's a template that no coach has ever been able to work with here. So again, and sustained it. And it felt like if Jedd Fisch had stayed at Arizona, he would have been able to sustain it. It didn't feel fluky at all. So on the field, what he was able to do from a talent acquisition perspective, absolutely fantastic. What he was able to do by getting the community involved, super good. All of that. I mean, those are A+ across the board. But like I said, when you leave, and you kind of go about looking to undermine the people that gave you that to me is what really kind of, I think, left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths.
It absolutely did. No. The sour taste in everybody's mouth is deserved. Your frustration with the way that Fisch left in the last week, it wasn't his best performance. Whether that's the real Jedd Fisch and we got played, none of that matters. Arizona has you just laid it out. Fisch did something that nobody else has done at Arizona. His template worked.
Yep.
So you have an opportunity with the next guy to utilize the template and see if he's good enough to make it work as well. Before Jedd Fisch, in the modern era of Arizona football, whatever you want to dictate as the modern era of Arizona football, You didn't feel like they had been able to crack whatever the difficult code was. Well, now you had a guy who pieced the jigsaw together.
Yeah.
So Brennan comes into a program with an opportunity to be on much more solid footing than he was before. Here's the reality. As frustrating as it was, it's the past. Jedd Fisch is gone. So now you have an opportunity and a new adventure in a new conference to see if Brennan can win at Arizona, and he may be able to do it with a template that was laid out from a coach that we feel jilted about, who up until last week was about to get a statue next to Lloyd Olsen. So good, even though he may be the biggest ass in football, but you now know what you can do to give yourself an opportunity to win at Arizona and maybe win at a higher level than we anticipated. And if you can do that, maybe other coaches can do that as well. And if that's the case, we ought to thank Fisch, I think, for being able to perform that as well as he did. Maybe that's good news for the future of the program.
Do you think with all that money that he's probably going to be using the Desert Financial Credit Union?
No, because he's in the Northwest.
But that doesn't mean that you can't still do something out here, I would assume. I'm all right with that. I think he's going to use the Desert Financial Credit Union because, again, he's got a lot of money looking to put it around, and he knows that they're about the community, their family. It's personal with the Desert Financial Credit Union. When you open a free checking account online, get $200 in bonuses. Get started by visiting desertfinancial.com/200. Desert Financial Credit Union. Now, let's go to the Desert Financial, back to basketball. Let's go back to the Desert Financial Credit Union by the numbers. All right, now, and we're going to get to that point right there, Adam. That's a great point. All right, now, Arizona 82-67. Arizona just... I don't know what really to say other than Arizona was just better than USC, period.
That was well said.
Hey,
look what Arizona did in that last category that Shu likes to bring up a lot. What'd they do, Mike Luke?
They rebounded.
Woohoo! Yes, there it is. And you keep doing that, you're going to give yourself some opportunities, even in games that are relatively pedestrian. SC seems like one of those teams that maybe the season's just luck isn't on their side. Maybe the season they aren't going to have enough time in the season to get everybody kind of acclimated with the talent that could be on the roster. I think to a large degree, it's kind of a frustrating year for them as they just kind of, saddle along. But you'd sort of like them to have an opportunity to get a little better, maybe. Or maybe we don't care because they're going to the Big Ten.
Back to Jedd Fisch just for a second. One thing I do want to say, though, and again, I know we're moving on, but again, sorry, this is elixir for me. One thing that I didn't understand, and again, I'm wrong on almost everything.
This is elixir for me.
True. I'm wrong on almost everything. But the one thing that was very clear to me this offseason and during fall camp was that Noah Fifita was the best quarterback on this roster. And it wasn't even close. Jedd Fisch, this is one thing that I think you at least got to keep in mind. And again, Arizona won 10 games. It's a bottom line business. That's all that matters. Jedd Fisch didn't play the best quarterback on the roster and one of the best in the country for the first 4 to 5 games of the season. And he was dragged kicking and screaming into putting Fifita in there after the JDL injury. Let's be honest here. If JDL is the starter, you're probably looking at a 6-6 team.
And you're looking at a 6-6 team where that coach is not coaching at another school. Take
Correct.
That for what it's worth.
That's also something too. It'll be interesting to see how he does at Washington because he didn't want to put Noah Fifita in there clearly, and he clearly didn't understand how good Noah Fifita is. So that's something that we also need to keep in mind here.
I think that's fair, and I think the the contrast to that is that Fisch appeared to have, once it was finally in the game, he appeared to communicate pretty well with Fifita, and probably I think you could favorably argue helped to make Fifita a better quarterback, which is again good news for the next regime if Fifita stays in the program.
All right. On that note, very much appreciate all of you. The head of Barstool. Yeah, David Blattman. Thank you. That is him, Jacob Franklin. All of you guys out there, you guys are fantastic. Appreciate all of you. Jacob Franklin behind the scenes making us look better than we should. We will be back tomorrow at 10:30. But again, back the A. Appreciate all of you. Back John Schuster. I am merely Mike Luke. You've been listening.
But behind you is an A. So we're all in front of that while we back that.
You have been listening to the AZ Wildcats postgame.
We all silly like the mayor.